You are listening to This Week in Clown World with Ben and Hobbs, so sit back, relax, take your black pill, and enjoy the show.
Guys, are you going to put out a link for the show? I don't see any link anywhere.
I just tagged you on Twitter, Simon, and good evening, everybody. It is once again time for This Week in Clown World with Ben and Hobbs. I'm Hobbs. He's Ben. Simon is joining us right at the top of the hour because there is a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and as you can probably tell, my voice is absolutely shot. One of the joys of being a parent to small children is you get access to all of the hottest new diseases before anybody on the block. So there is a lot going on in the news, especially within the last 20 to 30 minutes. And so I'm just going to let Ben and Simon start talking right now and interject when I have a question. Boys, take it away.
Well, yeah, my audio isn't as good. I'm traveling. I've got the Pornhub couch here in my Airbnb, as you can see in the background there. So hopefully it's good enough for everybody listening. Thank you for joining us, Simon. Kind of funny, you popped in here and you said, guys, so World War III's kicking off. You're like, haha, Simon. But apparently Israel is dropping bombs on Iran.
Yeah, not just, on various olive groves and hummus factories. They're taking out their nuclear facilities, radar stations, and main air force bases.
Yeah, that's kind of a step up from launching how many total drones did they decide Iran launched?
It was something like 300 total, which was a combination of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and their shitty old Shahed 136 drones.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a step up from launching some second-rate drones at Israel, and Israel responds with F-35s. Is that fair? Fair to say?
But if they're seriously trying to hit their kind of like in-mountain nuclear facilities, then they've got to be going at them with everything they've got, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, so to kind of set the stage for what's going on, we had a couple of weeks back, Israel bombed an Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria, or they didn't bomb the consulate, they bombed a building near the consulate because they said that the building was housing a bunch of high-ranking Iranian military officials, and therefore it was a legitimate military target. Iran responded by firing all of that ordnance that you just said there at Israel. However, they gave like 72 hours worth of notice and fired it at basically the wilderness so that they wouldn't risk hurting anybody. It was basically just a muscular show of, yes, we can do this if we wanted to. If pushed to it, we can retaliate like this. And it was supposed to be you blew something of ours up. We are showing you that we can blow something of yours up if we want to, but we don't want to right now. And now Israel is responding to the retaliation with another retaliation. And it might just actually kick off a nuclear third world war. Have I got that laid out about right, Simon?
Yeah, it wasn't that the Iranians hit nothing. The Shahed 136 appeared to be largely diversionary or distractionary. And they did hit 2 Israeli Air Force bases and their top spec listening station on Mount Hermon. And whilst it was originally claimed that, they just bounced the rubble and didn't really hit anything significant, and there was a couple of holes in the runway, and we kind of got a bulldozer and filled it in 15 minutes. Later on, these incredibly ill-disciplined Israeli conscripts were posting pictures of destroyed F-16s, and supposedly there was a lot of damage on the listening station on Mount Hermon, but that was all completely censored. Nothing came out on that because that was one of their kind of like top facilities. There were claims that they had struck the Dimona nuclear reactor, but that was later denied by both sides. And the other big context here is all day, literally since 10 a.m. We've been having the debate at the UN Security Council on Palestine being admitted as a full member to the United Nations, upgrading them from their observer status. And just literally like 3 hours ago, America was the one country that vetoed that. So they needed nine yes votes and no vetoes for it to be sent to the General Assembly for confirmation. And they got 12 yes votes, which was a big surprise, like a really big surprise, because France, Japan, and the Republic of Korea and Ecuador all voted against America's request. They didn't abstain, they voted yes. Britain and Switzerland abstained. And so America had to exercise their veto, and once again are standing alone. The Palestinian representative ended up in tears. The woman president of the UN Security Council was in tears. China was like, "You're total scum," and the entire non-line movement are absolutely disgusted. And what was significant was the fraternity being expressed amongst the 12 members on the UN Security Council, and America is truly alone with the Zionist entity.
Well, Simon, and on to the main news story. There's something funky going on with it because you told me to find it, and I found one story, and now it's gone. So I don't know if there's.
If you just go to my Twitter feed, just go to Simon from Florida.
But I mean, like the mainstream, they posted a story and then it went away. So there's something.
There's literally 50 stories out there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what they're trying to do is what I'm getting at. So they're trying something weird, or so keep your eyes peeled on this one.
Well, I mean, this could trigger, all kinds of simultaneous cyber attacks. I mean, bear in mind that with the exception of Lufthansa, because when the Israeli chief of their general staff went to visit one of the Air Force bases, he said everything should be relatively normal until the end of Passover, which is April 30th. Now, I, at the time, yesterday on our show, Sam and I, said, that is logical, but could also be a false messaging to the Iranians so that they stand down for a week rather than having all their air defense units on high alert indefinitely, which is very hard to sustain. Okay. Right. And lo and behold, it didn't even last 48 hours. And now they've done a massive attack. And
I'm not saying it was baloney. I'm just saying it's weird. I mean, you have all these other media sources posting stuff like videos of explosions, yet mainstream is kind of, crickets on the situation going on.
Well, it's 3 a.m. in London, 4 in Paris, and 10 in New York, right?
Sure.
So.
Right. So let's backtrack a little bit and kind of unpack that vote at the UN Security Council a little bit. We have these longtime allies of the United States, like France and South Korea, that are turning on the U.S. in order to try and make Palestine a member state of the UN rather than just observer status. Does that signify that the people in those countries genuinely have a concern for what's going on to Palestine, or does it signify that they are simply seeing it as the least bad option to avoid some type of further global escalation?
There's two things. One, the South Korean government just got massacred in their national elections, and that was largely seen as a repudiation of the president's foreign policy, which has been very pro-America and anti-China. The current Japanese prime minister, who came and bowed and scraped and even laid a wreath at Arlington National Cemetery, bearing in mind that some of the guys there were fighting the Japanese at Okinawa and Iwo Jima, right?
Mhm.
He utterly humiliated himself. His approval rating in Japan is currently 21%.
Hey,
Okay.
still beating our Congress.
Yeah. Well, you'd have to compare him to Biden rather than to the
Yeah.
overall. Biden is polling at 38 in terms of approval ratings at the moment. So, the other thing that's very, very significant, as the Chinese keep on saying, they literally don't want to be on the wrong side of history. But the third point that I'll make there is because Ecuador invaded with their SWAT teams the Mexican embassy in Quito
Mhm.
to arrest their former vice president, who they've charged with corruption, but who had claimed political asylum in the Mexican embassy. That's resulted in Mexico and Venezuela, and I think Colombia as well, severing diplomatic relations with Ecuador. So they were very, very isolated, and even the United States had criticized them. The Intercept that Glenn Greenwald had co-founded but left subsequently, they obtained some copies of diplomatic cables, both of Ecuadorian and American origin, and it made clear that America was essentially blackmailing Ecuador not only to vote against the Palestinian status upgrade, but that they were also using them as a cutout to lobby 6 or 7 other countries that America was trying to ensure would all abstain so that it could also abstain and didn't have to stand alone and exercise its permanent member veto. But it would seem that 5 of the 7 countries that they were trying to, it's 6 countries plus America as the 7th, um, all joined together and abstain. Only Switzerland and Britain followed that plan. Ecuador, France, Republic of Korea, and Japan all voted for Palestinian full membership, and there was really quite significant speeches from the like of Ecuador, France, and the Republic of Korea, basically talking about their own experiences of revolution and decolonization, and that was very much the common theme for many of the other members of the global south, particularly the African nations, who all said, what we're seeing Palestine go through now is the same kind of revolutionary decolonization that they had endured during the 1960s and 1970s, when America was often on the side of the colonial powers post Eisenhower because they regarded it as a Soviet proxy war. So the ambassador from Mozambique, for example, explained how it had taken them 10 years and hundreds of thousands of deaths to overthrow the Portuguese overlords of their country, and that they significantly identified with the struggles of the Palestinian people. And I really think that the American public are not fully appreciating the intense emotional connection between 75 to 85% of the world and what is currently occurring in Gaza.
Right. So, with Israel attacking the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and now you just explained how Ecuador stormed a Mexican embassy in order to arrest that one guy. I mean, this really seems like it's the precursor to the full collapse of the old rules-based order, because embassies are supposed to be like sacred ground that's off limits during wartime. Police actions are supposed to be inviolate spaces.
They're the
And now
Continental.
exactly, you're not supposed to violate the sanctity of a sovereign nation's embassy, and now it
But
looks like the dominoes are starting to fall.
obviously, from an American perspective, don't forget what happened in 1979, though, right?
Right.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it has been going on for a while then.
So, I mean, obviously that led to a year-long hostage situation when the Iranian revolutionaries stormed the US embassy and took a lot of people hostage. Some of them managed to get to the Canadian embassy and the Swedish embassy, but a lot of them were held hostage for a very, very long time. And then when we tried to do a hostage rescue operation, that was unfortunately Operation Clusterfuck. And so that really went bad.
Yeah, but it's a little bit different because, I mean, I know you're not supposed to say that you expect that kind of behavior from a country like Iran, but you do expect that kind of behavior from Iran. But when a more westernized country like Ecuador and Israel starts violating the sanctity of the embassy system, then it starts to kind of feel like the rules no longer apply.
I would entirely agree with you. I mean, not only do you have the Hague Conventions dating back, literally to the early 1900s, but you also have the Vienna Conventions of 1961, both on embassies and also specifically covering consulates. There's actually two Vienna Conventions of 1961, one for embassies and one for consulates. So even if you would take the view that it was a consulate building and not the main embassy, which was the building literally right next door, also the residences of ambassadors are covered, because often they don't live within the embassy. They might have some, house somewhere else. And in the building next door, a whole floor of that building was his family apartment.
Right.
Well, I've always found it interesting that they're relating it to a colonization, narrative when it comes to the West when they're talking about Palestine, which
they're talking in terms of their armed struggles for decolonization. Yeah.
The same way that they try and say that what Israel's doing terrible, but it's not a genocide.
You don't think so?
Well, they're the same genotype.
Well, you can still define them by citizenship.
Yeah,
and so they appear to be doing definitely fulfilling one, if not all four, of the definitions of genocide under the Genocide Convention. Hence the International Court of Justice ruling by 16-1 that it was a plausible genocide in their interim ruling.
Right. I mean, just because they've got the same, genetic ancestry doesn't mean that the rules of genocide doesn't apply, and it does seem.
Yeah, I mean, they've got different citizenship.
No, it's still
religion,
terrible. It's just
in a different territory. So that those are three different characters.
And they're also killing Christians too. I mean, that Tucker Carlson interview was amazing.
Well, that Tucker Carlson interview, which I did watch, was with Pastor Isaac Munther, who runs a evangelical Lutheran church. I didn't even know such a thing existed, to be honest, in Bethlehem. But certainly in Gaza, the Christians are like 1 or 2% of the population. But there are some 1,500-year-old churches. Well, there were, so they were all blown up in Gaza.
Right. I know Justin Amash, when they first started bombing things in Gaza after October 7th, Justin Amash lost like a second nephew or something in one of the church bombings. He was rather upset because he's a Palestinian Christian or of Palestinian Christian descent.
Yeah. So there's a woman called Layla. It's either Moran or Morgan. Forgive me, I can't remember whether there's a G in her name or not. And she lost over 20 members of her family in bombings.
And he made a good point. I mean, why isn't, you have these evangelicals in Congress, why aren't they saying anything? But you and Sam bring up all the time, they're crazy
Christian Zionists.
Yeah, they're crazy Zionists who are.
Yeah.
And the red heifer thing you guys have been bringing up has been fun to follow.
Well, that there seemed to be a range of dates for that. One was March 29th, that passed. Then April 10th, that seemed highly likely. Everyone was anticipating that. Then they filed for a permit to take the bull's ashes onto the Temple Mount on April the 22nd. So that's just next week.
Well, did I miss something? I thought they found a black hair on it or something, and they sent it back. Or did they finally find?
No, they've got a whole herd of them now. They originally imported 5 of them from Texas, where they'd been genetically created, and the rule is they're not supposed to have, I don't know, it's either 2 or 5 white or black hairs in order to be considered completely pure. Something bizarre, they can't be milked.
Yeah, because if there's anything God would want, it would be a man-made. If there's anything God would want to glorify, it would be a man-made abomination of a genetically spliced bull. I mean,
well, that is one of the major criticisms from the religious point of view. That it is an artificially created fulfillment.
Right. So I've got a question over here in one of the chats that I'm in, and a friend of mine, Brandon, he wants to know what the significance is that the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia all sided with Israel in the Iran attack, insofar as they helped them shoot stuff down.
Okay, so Jordan really prostrated themselves, and now they have utterly destroyed whatever reputation they had remaining in the Arab League. They went all in, and they put out this bullshit story that they were defending their air space, and that's why they were flying their Jordanian F-16s to shoot down the drones. The Israeli Air Force had flown diagonally across Jordan to do a sideswipe attack into Syria on the city of Aleppo, and then flown back by a similar route, not exactly the same, but parallel. And so everyone was like, okay, so you're willing to do a full-scale Air Force alert to shoot down these Iranian drones that aren't attacking you, just flying over you, and you claim that you are defending your sovereign airspace, which is legally correct, right? But you didn't do that when a whole squadron of F-16s flew over you 3 weeks beforehand. So how do you reconcile that? So they've been utterly crushed at that. They were strongly attacked by the Iranians. They summoned the Iranian ambassador, and the Iranians kind of wound it back, because they had been suggesting in the Iranian local media that Jordan was their next target, because they were so disgusted at the Jordanian Air Force flanking operations for the IAF. Now, the Jordanians are saying, well, we're supplying loads of food, and we're running medical operations in Gaza, and we're also doing pointless airdrops. Okay, but frankly, the big problem that the Jordanians have, and the local media have pointed this out, that I haven't seen it touched anywhere in English language media apart from what Sam and I have been covering, is on the 30th of April, their water supply agreement from Israel that has these major desalination centers to take water out of the Mediterranean Sea and take the salt out of it and then pump it to Jordan, right? That expires in just 10 days. And if they shut off the water, the Jordanians are in deep, deep, deep shit. And so supposedly it's been reported in the Jordanian media that the Israelis are stacking up massive conditionality. Like, you can't criticize us, don't use the word genocide, help us defend our airspace, allow us to station, like, surveillance people and, SIGINTEL and all this kind of stuff in your country, or you're getting no water. And that situation is unknown to most people. But that's why the Jordanian government has basically completely folded on this situation. Now, the problem is the Iraqis are super pissed off about that. The Iranians are super pissed off about that. The Syrians are super pissed off about that. The Lebanese are pissed off about that. The Palestinians in the West Bank, like, pretty much everyone is like, okay, well, you might have to introduce water rationing or something, or, take a shower instead of a bath. But that doesn't mean that you should be like flying alongside the Israeli Air Force. Now, it's now been reported or admitted by the French that the only reason they got involved in this operation, that on the face of it was going to be joint British flying out of Cyprus, Americans also flying out of Jordan, and the Israelis, was because the Jordanians asked the French to help them. So that took it from a 3-country coalition to a 5-country coalition.
Yeah, that whole area. I mean, I could see where Saudi and Iraq would have something to gain from a weak Iran, though.
Yeah, but see, this whole story that the Saudis were involved, frankly, I believe that they were sharing the radar tracking data because they've got an integrated missile defense system with the United States throughout the entire 6 countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. They've had that for years. Okay, so even though they've had this rapprochement with the Iranians, they're having air defense exercises like every 2 months with the US Air Force in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia and in Bahrain and these kind of countries. Okay, so I don't think they literally pulled the plug on their data sharing, but I seem to disbelieve that the UAE flew their Air Force jets in the Persian Gulf to shoot down missiles that were actually transiting over Iraq. Okay, so that's just implausible. The Saudis could have projected force over Jordan with their permission, or over Syria. Sorry, not Syria, I mean Iraq. We have to remember that the entire Iraqi Air Force is basically run by American contractors. It's a whole load of old F-16s, and all the maintenance, air traffic control, arming, everything is done by American contractors, who in many cases are simply retabbed US Air Force. Okay, and so the only website that was suggesting that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia Air Force was flying their own KSA marked aircraft shooting down missiles was one called House of Saud, which is some kind of like commentary website on various princes and stuff, and isn't anything officially to do with the Saudi Arabian government, and isn't even really kind of, not even alt media, let alone mainstream media. Okay, so that source that quoted a unnamed prince is very, very thin indeed, and the Saudis have strongly denied it, but the Jordanians have not. So they came up with this pathetic excuse of kind of, we defend our airspace against anyone, and we don't care if you come from the east or you come from the west, we'll shoot you down. Well, that's bullshit. They haven't fired a missile against the Israelis since their peace treaty in 1994.
Well, the King of Jordan's very Western.
Flying over them. So yeah, so we don't really that's not got much credibility, I would suggest.
I'd say it probably comes down to, do those countries hate the Jews more than they love American money and weapons? And I think that the weapons and money won out in this instance.
Yeah, either that or you actually want to be able to drink water.
Yeah. That too. Thirsty in the desert is a hell of a way to go.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of strange allies, I'm surprised that to jump across the ocean a little bit, that the Biden administration is sticking to their guns and supporting Israel at the loss of votes, especially with RFK Jr. getting on the ballot in Michigan, which just so happens to have one of the largest Muslims.
Is that RFK Jr. is a crazy Zionist as well. Basically, it's take your pick of crazy Zionists. So the only policy that he hasn't reversed himself on is supporting Israel so far. Otherwise, RFK is literally, flipped on immigration, flipped on student loans, flipped on environmental aspects. He's like reversed himself on everything apart from Israel and vaccine safety.
I just thought it was interesting that Michigan was a state, and they're the one with the largest amount of Muslims.
Well, it's not just Michigan; it's Minnesota, and they lost 30% of the vote in Hawaii, and now you're seeing all these student protests breaking out in universities all across America, which is finally taking us back to the kind of peacenik Vietnam era. We haven't had a Kent State massacre yet, but this is what universities are supposed to do, right? Kind of like back the underdog against the man. And unfortunately, they're rather late to the game. But we see that Columbia University today called the police on their own students, and they also suspended the daughter of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that because the United States UN ambassador exercising the veto in the Palestinian member state vote, it doesn't bode well for Biden's reelection, because backing Israel to the hilt does not sit well with the Democrat base. That's one of, if not the biggest issue on the left right now, is what's going on in Israel and Palestine. And so for them to do that, I mean, Biden's already underwater as it is.
But it's not one. You've got to look at the Jewish penetration of the senior U.S. government. There's like 30 or 40 of them who are either Jewish, married to a Jew, or have dual citizenship. The penetration there is astronomical and vastly disproportionate to their representation in American society. But Biden's been saying for 40 years that he's a Catholic Zionist. He's not an evangelical Zionist. He's a Catholic Zionist.
Right. So, but the thing is like in electoral politics, the Israel shilling is where the money is at, but supporting Palestine is where the votes are at. So how are they going to square that circle without making it so obvious that they're cheating?
Yeah. I mean, you say that, but really, that has only come about during the Obama administration, where he was just flying in hundreds of thousands of pretty radical folks, in particular from Somalia, and he was stuffing them all into Minnesota and Michigan. But the number of voters who voted uncommitted or none of the above in those two states far exceeded Biden's rigged margin of victory. So he's going to have to stuff the ballot boxes for an extra few 100,000 votes to allow for those people who either won't show up or will only vote once rather than 3 times.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, apparently they've done the math, and Jewish money is more important than college student votes.
Must
I
be.
can't imagine why they'd stick with it unless that's what they figured. Or it's just a case that they're like, well, they're not going to vote for Trump, so we can do whatever the hell we want.
Yeah, but it's not just a question of the people flipping. It's a question of them not showing up at all. But I mean, also you've got to remember that it's the young people that they may be too stoned to remember what day they should vote on, but they do actually get out and help run campaigns and do leafleting and, calls and drive people to the polls and stuff, right?
I just couldn't imagine being a 20-year-old college student and Biden's your guy.
Well, you saw the 2 instances of what happened in New York over the weekend, right? You had Trump had an off the record stop at a bodega, and there were people lined up around the block in Harlem, a place that allegedly voted 87% Democrat in the last election. Trump shows up and people are around the block to meet him, to see him, just to get a glimpse of him, shouting, "We love Trump, 4 more years," all this, that. So Biden thought that, if Trump can do that in New York, I should be able to do something similar in New York. He does an off the record at a gas station, and the people at the gas station are like, "Hi."
Yeah.
Like nobody gives
in
a shit.
Pennsylvania, they're like, who the fuck's this guy?
Yeah, I mean, there's suggestions that Trump is polling at 30% in the black communities now, 30%.
Yeah.
So he's more than doubled his share of the vote, because they remember that he not only had a lot of black pastors regularly at the White House, he basically paid them off handsomely with massive financial gifts to what they call the HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities, right? But he also got black unemployment down to incredibly low rates. And then his daughter, Ivanka, persuaded him to do the drug sentencing reform that enabled a lot of African-American people to get early releases, having been previously stitched up on criminal charges that both Harris, Biden, and the Clintons had elevated, so that you could go to jail for 20 years for like a bag of marijuana, but you could be a Wall Street guy caught with a kilo of cocaine and you'd get like community service. So, there was significant injustices that Trump attempted to address, whilst obviously locking the whole country down and advocating for the death jab.
Well, and they say that, so many more blacks voted for Biden than Trump. And the more I see what the weird shit that's come out from the election, and seeing, the black community was aware of all that Trump was doing for them.
But now what they're really concerned about is they are the level who are starting to experience the ethnic cleansing with all the migrants coming in. I mean,
Right.
they're really feeling that directly.
Yeah,
I mean, that was happening in California 20 years ago, that historically black neighborhoods, they were literally being not bought out, they were being forced out of those neighborhoods.
Well, and I brought that up on the last show we did, where that YouTube channel I watched, where he travels across the deep south, and he was in a 90% black area, and this elderly black, I don't know if you were on when we were talking about it, she was on her front porch and he just started talking to her, and she started talking about the great replacement theory of what was going on with immigrants and black people. And here's somebody in the rural South who probably isn't plugged into the internet, but she is still seeing what's going on. So the rest of her
hopefully, if she listens to me on InfoWars or with you guys or with Sam, she'll appreciate that the new phrase instead of replacement theory is the ameliorating divergent demographic trends. It's ADDT.
Right.
And it's about as friendly as the original DDT.
Right. The news made the great replacement theory, or DDT. They made that out to be just white people pissed off about the browning of the neighborhood, but the people that are getting the brunt of it are the lower income urban blacks who are, like you said, being forced out of their neighborhoods by waves of immigrants. At 20 years ago, there's actually a caller in to InfoWars today who said that exact same thing. He said LA used to be a black city, and then all of the illegal immigrants come up from Mexico, and there were all of these turf wars, and all the black people either got killed or moved away. And so, and now you're not seeing the sort of stealth replacement of blacks in urban areas by immigrants from Latin America. What I think is really pissing them off now is you're seeing openly, brazenly local, state, and federal resources being given out to these foreign invaders that are coming in, and the people who live in these neighborhoods, whether they're black or white or Asian or Hispanic, people that have lived there their entire lives, born and raised there, are seeing all of these new arrivals get benefits shelled out to them in quantities that they could have only dreamed of in their wildest dreams. And they're like, hold up, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah, and they've got nowhere to flight to. They can't pull the old white flight trick and go to the suburbs. I mean,
Yeah.
they're stuck.
And they don't have, in many cases, the educational achievement for one reason or another that would enable them to move to, like, New Zealand or Switzerland or France or wherever, whatever bolt hole they might feel for right or wrong would be a good place to go to. That's going to be very, very hard to achieve without a master's degree. So it's worth pointing out that, these forces cooperate until they've managed to create the ethnic cleansing, and then you immediately see all of the Central American communities fighting amongst themselves. So the Guatemalans will be fighting the Ecuadorians, will be fighting the Hondurans, will be fighting the Nicaraguans, will be fighting the Costa Ricans, will be fighting the Panamanians. So people say Latinos, but they're really, really not that unified. They have certain things like Catholicism, and in some cases, favorite musicians, and there may even be some food similarities. But when people get put under pressure, they'll still identify nationalistic tendencies in order to kind of like form micro gangs or national groupings in order to defend their interests to the best extent. But what that ends up really reinforcing is the destruction of any sense, if one even argued that it's existed at all in America post the Vietnam War, for any kind of national identity or national cohesion. And that's exactly the same situation that we're seeing in Britain now. When they poll people, would you fight for God, king, and country? It's like 20% yes. That there's no concept of duty or national cohesion whatsoever. Now, I personally would suggest that that was a lesson that should have been learned during the First World War, when people were sent to walk into machine guns for no purpose whatsoever. But probably up until about 1970, that would have received a really high percentage vote. And I think that era of the last 50 years has been mirrored very much in the United States and in Britain. And this is at a time now where we're having this renewed conversation throughout all the nations of NATO, not only for reintroduced conscription, but like Ukraine and Israel, potentially conscription for men and women and anything in between, and for the duration, not just for 12 months.
Yeah, they're shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, they're been preaching for several decades that nationalism is bad. Well, yeah, it's bad until you want to send them off to war with somebody. Then nationalism is good.
So, I mean, you look at the Conscription Amendment Act that got signed by Zelensky this week in Ukraine. And one of the key features that it was supposed to have was that when you'd done 3 years service, you got released. And that, at the last moment, that provision got stripped out. So imagine you've been in combat against the Russians for over 2 years, and you figured there was a slight glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel, and now you got told, sorry, just like WW2, you're in until the war is officially over.
Probably need to start marching towards Kiev themselves at that point.
Yeah, either that or calling the whatever the guard channel is to arrange your surrender with the
I'm
Russians.
honestly surprised there hasn't been some sort of military coup in Ukraine at this point.
Well, we're starting to see battalion level surrenders now in Ukraine. Before it was like squad and platoon, and now it's gone to battalion level.
Right, they're taking their chances with the Russians, and I think I would too. My friend Alex, he tells me that the people that are around Zelensky are not Ukrainians, just for that reason, that he's got foreign contractors.
The chief of the Ukrainian military who replaced Zaluzhny, he's born and bred Russian. He was born just to the east of Moscow. His parents still live in Russia. He has like a Russian brother. His son has Russian citizenship, and now there he is, having gone to a Russian military academy as head of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, that's a case of history repeating. Then, if Zelensky's got his own Varangian guard going, except they're just not Scandinavians.
Don't forget Lee, Robert Lee. He wasn't he the commandant of West Point?
Yeah.
And he didn't want to command the Confederate forces, and they literally had to persuade him to do it.
It was a little bit different
than
that.
It came down to his farm happened to be 3 miles one way instead of the other. Generally accepted theory at this point.
But the foreign mercenaries and elite retirees are the ones that are Zelensky's personal guard, because he knows that if he surrounded himself with his fellow Ukrainians, they'd probably put a bullet in his back and say, all right, this is over. Done.
Well, that's the joke there now, is that Zelensky's English is better than his Ukrainian, because before that he only spoke Russian.
And now they're outlawing anything broadcast in the Russian language in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, if this Iran thing picks up, I mean, Zelensky drops down another notch on the funding.
Have you guys noticed in the last couple of days that Milei of Argentina has applied to become a NATO global partner?
Argentina, a country on the Pacific coast in the Southern Hemisphere, wants to be a partner nation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
No. To be fair, he's on the Atlantic coast, right?
Oh,
he's on the Atlantic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. But he's South Atlantic rather than North Atlantic.
Just need to start SATO. We'll start SATO down there for him.
SATO. Yeah. And
then we can pull in New Zealand and Australia because they're close enough to him that they could be considered Atlantic.
Yeah. Well, don't forget they both already are what are called ITAP, individually tailored partnership program members, and that's exactly what he wants, and that's what Israel has, and he's saying that he wants Argentina to be allied with Israel and America. And he was in America last week pitching that, and he's saying that we may not be like Germany or Britain, but he's committed, even though they're on the verge of bankruptcy, $300 million to buy 24 like 40-year-old F-16s from the Danes that apparently are so shitty they won't even give them for free to the Ukrainians. And he's buying new ships and new APCs, and he claims that he's going to revitalize the Argentinian military so that they can be a great outpost for the hegemon. And supposedly he figures that'll keep him from being bankrupted by the World Bank Group. The Russians were commenting on that today. I'm sure the Chinese will have something to say about that, but it's clearly against the trends of South America, which for the most part seem to be very pro-global South and not closely aligning themselves with those extra-friendly genocidal aardvarks.
He is this close to needing a big hat and a cape like any proper Latin American dictator.
No. He's going for a small hat.
Well, he can wear the small hat under the big hat.
Well, and I'll say in his defense, if he's going to buddy up to America, it's because we really are the last free country, which is sad that this this is the most free country left in the world.
It's barely even that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
everybody else has fallen so
that's
far.
until the Senate passes the FISA Reauthorization Act that extends the surveillance requirement to every single company that handles your personal data in any respect whatsoever, which is essentially everyone other than kind of like street hot dog vendors.
Yeah, what the former CEO of Signal came out and said the CIA came to him and told him he had to put in backdoors for him in his software. Who knows what they tried to leverage over him to make that happen. He didn't go into details, but they're in everything, I'm sure.
And there's a ton of domestic news that we haven't had time to get to. Like
we've got 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say we have like the articles of impeachment against Alejandro Mayorkas passed through the House, went to the Senate, and they tabled them, which was unprecedented. It has never been done before.
They're not tabled; they dismissed them.
Yeah, Bongino had a good hot take on that, though. That overall, it's a net good thing.
Yep, that as soon as if the Republicans retake the Senate in the next election and Donald Trump gets elected president, if the Democrats have any kind of pull in the House, they're going to impeach him on day one. And as soon as it goes to the Senate, a Republican-controlled Senate can just be like, nah, dismissed.
Dismissed.
So that's assuming that 20 of them don't vote against him.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
There's a what's his name, the dipshit from Wisconsin that said he was going to be resigning tomorrow, ended up saying Gallagher said that he's actually going to be extending his tenure in the House because he wants to make sure that Ukraine can get more of our money, which is great.
It's not just Ukraine. He was the chairman of the Special Select Committee on the influences of the Chinese Communist Party in America. And so he wants to see the TikTok bill go through, and he also wants to see the aid to Taiwan.
Yep. So
yeah, I mean, you dovetail that story that came out from the Signal CEO. It makes it pretty obvious why they want to get rid of TikTok, because I'm sure that ByteDance or whatever, which is controlled by the Chinese government, would not let the CIA put a backdoor in their software. There's Chinese backdoors, but which is worse at this point, a Chinese backdoor or a CIA backdoor?
Well, the Chinese one's tighter, apparently.
Because we've had a lot of Israeli penetration in our backdoor. So
yeah, that's right. Well,
at least it's got a smooth knob on it because it's circumcised. But the Mayorkas thing. I mean, I thought that was kind of a good take by Bongino, and I hadn't thought of that one. That and the Democrats always do that. They'll do some political bullshit, and the Republicans, well, guess that's on the table now.
Right, and that's something that I've been saying for years. When somebody like Bongino says that this is a net good, and it looks like the Democrats are kind of not looking two steps in front of them, and they're about to fall into a hole by grant. Well, maybe they are. Maybe they're more than two steps ahead when they give themselves this sort of a power, and the other side looks at them and says, well, what happens if we get elected and now we have this weapon? It's
Yeah, but
implied it's implied that you guys are never going to get elected again to be able to use this weapon. That's what the implication is in my mind.
this is the thing, that it's like, some people would say apples and oranges. I would say A and O, but in this case, A and O is Antichrist versus the Orange Man. And the Dems stick together, but
Right.
the Republicans are like herding cats, as we're seeing in the House now. And I mean, that's the other thing that I guess we've got to mention is the whole Freedom Caucus say that they're going to vote against all of the aid bills. And as of yesterday, Johnson was going to try and change the House rules and amend McCarthy's deal so that it would be like 20 signatures necessary in order to have a motion to vacate. Not quite sure how it'd have done that retrospectively, given that one's already been posted. But Green's done this weird thing that she put it in the basket in the House, but she hasn't actually read it from the podium. So it's not actually activated yet. And then it has to be voted on within 48 hours. And given that they're going to have this kind of like very, very rare all-day session on Saturday to pass like 4 separate bills and then a 5th one to add them all together and send them to the Senate. I mean, if she was going to pull that trigger, she should have pulled it like today or yesterday, right?
Yeah,
and now it's probably going to be too late, and she's going to be like squealing about it after the fact. But the $100 billion will be winging its way to the aardvarks and the Taiwanese and the Nazis at that point.
And Simon, just to update, 2 minutes ago now, the mainstream media has decided they're gonna put that story back up on all their sites now.
Did they all start following my Twitter feed?
Yeah, I guess. Like I said, they showed up and then they're gone, and now here they're back. 2 minutes ago, now they're back. So
see, there was a mistake from Mossad, and they sent their instructions in Hebrew rather than English. They had to check the translation. It took 30 minutes.
They did a cut and paste and
in Google Translate, right? So yeah, speaking of Mike Johnson, and I guess in a way Kevin McCarthy, there's the motion to vacate the chair that a lot of like Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the other Freedom Caucus members are talking about, going through this song and dance again. They went to the backbench to get Mike Johnson in the first place. He was nobody's first pick. He was nobody's second pick. He was kind of the consolation prize.
No, I disagree. He was a Zionist backup plan. So they put up Jordan. He was a protege of Jordan. He'd been on the Judiciary Committee with him for like a decade. They had traveled twice around Israel together with the current Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. And when they couldn't get Jordan through, he was the next most Zionist member of the leadership, albeit in the most junior position of the GOP. They may have had great plans for him in 10 years' time, and they had to expedite those because Jordan couldn't get the votes to win. But no, they've been grooming him for a long time.
Okay, so with that being said, if we have to go through the partisan song and dance in order to get another speaker, assuming that these motions to vacate go anywhere at all, with the Republicans only having a 1-seat majority in the House right now.
2 things. So that 1-seat majority, assuming that all the vacant seats had their Democrats re-elected, and it went back to 218 to 217. So at the moment, there's 4 dead or retired Democrats. So it's 218 to 213 with 4 vacant seats. Now, I mean, the other thing that's important to note is Massey is now co-sponsoring MTG's motion. Okay, he was interviewed yesterday and today, and he's saying that there's a whole load of people who are pissed off, and that it's not going to be, like 5 or 10 rebels. It's going to be like 20. Now, they often say that, and when their phone calls with their tax accountants get played back to them, they suddenly remember how much they love the establishment. But I think what was the important scheme they tried to hatch is Marjorie Taylor Greene asked in a private meeting that obviously leaked immediately with Johnson. She went in with him one-on-one and said, so that we don't have a massive hash up like we did with McCarthy, we're going to vacate you, you're going to lose, and we want you to announce that you're resigning effective the 15th of May, or pick a date, right? And that they would have their leadership battle now in advance of that date, in order that they didn't have, like they did last time, a 2-week period with no confirmed speaker that meant that it was impossible to pass any legislation at all, even under emergency circumstances.
Right.
So they tried to avoid that. He refused to resign, and it looked like he was going to get a deal with the Democrats to save him in return for putting the Senate bill for the National Security Supplemental Appropriations unaltered without amendments on the floor of the House, and then just pass that identical bill and it literally be couriered to Biden to sign. Okay? But because he's not only broken it into 3 parts, which is not in itself a problem, but he's added a 4th part that's got a whole load of other stuff and a tiny bit of border bill being suggested, though it's not on paper at the moment. It is not the deal that the Democrats were offering him. They were like, you get the Senate bill through, we will save you. And instead, he's trying to thread the needle and get almost all of that through, plus some other stuff about TikTok to somehow appease Gallagher. I don't understand why he's appeasing him in the first place, because if he had resigned on April 2nd, then there could have been a special in Wisconsin,
Right.
and his seat would have been filled. But now it's going to be vacant all the way through until January of next year, which literally takes them from 218 to 217. So when those 4 Democrats have their specials, it will be a tie.
Right. And that's why he's trying to appease Gallagher in order to stay on a little bit longer, I think, is because if the motion to vacate comes through and those 4 Democrat seats get filled and Mike Gallagher leaves, that would leave it at a tie. There is some speculations going on that there are other Republicans waiting in the wings to also resign or retire, which would make a Democrat majority, and then we would have Speaker Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, 2 things. So, some of those Democrat seats aren't going to be filled until June, so that's quite a way away. And 2, whilst being in control of the House might be really beneficial in terms of certifying or not certifying, in an insurrectionist kind of way, the election winner in November. I don't think Hakeem Jeffries wants to touch the speakership with a shit-dipped stick at the moment. He's really, really happy, as that Napoleon saying exists, don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a really big mistake. And they're really happy to see the Republican Party tear themselves apart. And they know that they can pay off a couple of Republicans with some massive defense contract, seat on the board, or a university chancellorship, or a federal judgeship or something like that at pretty much any point between now and November. So they're real happy to see the Republicans just literally like in like a pit bull fight. And then maybe they'll pull that trigger after the conventions are over. So maybe like in September.
Right. Lots of House of Cards style political intrigue going on. So
But
we're
it
just
makes
a
it
little.
makes for a good podcast, right?
It
Yeah.
really does.
Assuming that we don't all get nuked in our mother's basements.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're a little bit over an hour right now. I think I got to go let my voice rest, and I got to go to work tomorrow.
Okay.
So thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much for inviting me, guys. It's been a real pleasure. And I think
Always
we've had
is.
like a
Yep.
really productive conversation tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, and as always, catch Simon on Weaponized News. I've been driving a lot lately, Simon, so I've been able to catch a lot of the shows. It's always a good time on their show to catch up on everything. And as you saw here tonight, I mean, Simon can break stuff before the mainstream. So if you're watching Weaponized News, you're going to catch it before most people know about it. And
I'll break a quick story with you if you like.
Go ahead.
That this is of a personal nature. It looks like I might become. There's some details to be ironed out, but I might be a regular feature, 5 minutes every show on the George Galloway show, starting possibly even this weekend.
Nice.
So that's 4 million viewers.
So yeah, you catch Simon there if it kicks off.
Give us a shout out.
I'll try to. I normally don't even get to shout out myself, but it's also quite hard compressing 4 days of news into 5 minutes or less.
Yeah, I was gonna comment, but you brought it up. You're gonna have to show great restraint on getting that into 5 minutes.
Having said that, 5 minutes or less is exactly what President Trump told his ambassador to Israel to brief him on when deciding whether or not to recognize the annexation of the Golan Heights and moving America's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So apparently you can make really massive decisions in 5 minutes or less.
Well, great. Hope that works out. And what time? I never catch you guys live. What time are you guys on live if people want to catch you?
Normally we are starting our show at 7 p.m. New York, so that's 6 p.m. Central.
So there you go. Weaponized News. We'll be back next week.
And we're doing 6 days a week.
6 days a week.
But the Saturday show is with a third chap from New Hampshire, and that normally starts at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Great.
There you go.
And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Simon. And as always, stay honky.